You did not get full points on the binder check or the constructed response practice test when I checked it. The practice test you could always resubmit through Schoology, but the binder check, super important. That's like 20% of your grade right there is you taking notes. You just show me one day in class, and as long as I'm not in the middle of teaching, yeah, I'll stop and recount all your pages. But you do need all the pages, like I don't remember which ones you were missing. So you have to show me all of them again when you do resubmit it. All right, the number 5 on the study guide. So we have the function below, modeling expected net worth, and after X years. Here's that equation. You're going to complete the blanks that make the statement true. It gives you an equivalent form of that equation. Can you guys tell me what form they're giving us right here? What do we call it when it looks like that? So they're giving us the factor form of the original equation. What's really easy to see from factor form? Factor. The x-intercepts or zeros would actually be what you can see pretty easily. What are the zeros of this? So remember that, because the next part says it reveals that the company's expected net worth is 0 after blank years and after blank years. So if you need to graph this to visualize it, by all means, but I know that since it's a negative x squared, that the graph's gonna look something like this when I graph it. And what would go on the x-axis? Look at the things being compared. We have net worth and years. What should go on the x-axis? Years, because time is almost always on the x-axis, which means that my y-axis is representing net worth. If I want to know when the net worth is 0, it would be 0 where? At the x-axis, right? Because that's where all the y's are 0. So that kind of gives you a visual of where to look. And then also the fact that they gave it to you in factor form, you technically don't need to graph it to see the zeros, but if you need to, by all means. It should have a 0 at 4 and at 12. So that means after 4 years, it'll be 0. And after 12 years, the net worth will be 0. The next form that they give you, can you guys recognize this form? This is vertex form, which you can clearly see the vertex from. So, by the way, you need to have the vertex formula memorized. It's super helpful, I think, in some of these problems. And you would need to know that HK would be your vertex. So what's my vertex from this formula? 8 and 0.32. And of course, you could always graph it and see that the vertex is 8.32 if you can't tell from the equation. But yeah, and remember, X is supposed to be for years, Y is supposed to be for net worth. So it reveals that the company's maximum, which also makes sense because our vertex is a maximum in this case. It reveals that the company's maximum expected net worth is what, 8 or 0.32? What goes here? $0.32 million. So this was the net worth part of it. Which occurs after how many years? After 8 years. That's how you interpret the vertex. So you're interpreting the zeros, interpreting the vertex, and identifying them. And you could graph it. You could identify it from the graph or from the equation. So this is a really good test question. Questions on this one? Questions on others? And it could be from the constructed response. It could be from this one. Yosina? Number 1 on which one? Like the online one? Yeah. Okay. So, number 1. Everett is making a concrete path X feet wide around a rectangular fish pond that measures 6 by 12. So the entire rectangular path all the way around is X feet long. Okay, so just know that. And then we want a function that represents the total area of the path and the fish pond. So really that means I want the area of the whole large rectangle. So what I would need to do is, how do you find area of a rectangle? One more time. Length times width. I would need the length of this side, like this whole side, not just the fish pond, which is 6. So I know that if I like add this all up, it becomes 6 plus x plus x. And I could even condense that. What does it become when I combine my terms? 6x squared. So x squared would be if I multiplied. I'm adding these. What's x plus x? Good. That's going to be my expression for the length. Because that would give me this. For the width, I do something similar. It's going to be 12 plus this x plus that x. And then you can condense that into what? Combine length term. 12 plus 2x. So now I have expressions for the length and the width of the whole big rectangle. I am going to multiply those out. And you guys know how to multiply binomials. You could FOIL, you could box method, you could double distribute. What do you guys like better? Okay, so then that would be me multiplying 6 by 12. What's 6 times 12? 72, and then 6 by 2x is 12x, just 12x, not 12x or anything. It's just 6 times 2x. And then we're distributing the 2x. So this 2x, what's 2x times 12? And 2x times 2x. Okay, so that's where the x squared comes, is we multiply x times x. And then I'm looking at my answer options. Only one of them has a 4x squared. So I already actually know my answer is going to be that one. But normally you would combine like terms, and yes, this middle term does become 36x. And if I just rearrange the order, this now matches exactly. Questions on this question? Steven? Yes, questions on this question? All right, questions on others? Josina? On this one? Okay. So number 3 on this one. A projectile is fired into the air. The equation below can be used to determine h, the height of the projectile after t seconds. What's the domain and range of the function? So domain refers to all the what in a function? X's, and range refers to all the, if you don't know that, an easy way to remember that is Dr. XY, just to know which is which. But anyway, we are comparing height and time in seconds. So when I do graph this, what should go on my x-axis, height or time? Good. And then that means my y-axis is my height, and it doesn't specify that it's like feet or meters, but you guys know what a reasonable unit for height would be. And the reason why that's important is because we have to pick a reasonable domain and range. So like for the domain, the x's, the time, can I have negative seconds? Can I have decimals of a second? So when you do pick your answer, you have to pick phrases that don't include negatives and that include decimals, because you said time to be decimals, but not negatives. What about height? Can height be negative? Can height be a decimal? So also keep that in mind. I probably actually need to graph it because this needs numbers for where it starts and ends. So let me go ahead and graph it so I can see where it starts and ends. but it was 48t minus 16t squared. I'm gonna use x's because time goes on the x anyway. And it won't repeat unless you put like the whole thing in. So check 48x minus 16x squared. Here's my graph. My domain, my x's go from 0 to 3. So when you're picking your answers, we're gonna pick the one that has from 0 to 3, so we're not gonna pick these two. And they use different phrases here. Is it gonna be all real numbers from 0 to 3 or all whole numbers from 0 to 3? All real numbers. Because all whole numbers would exclude the decimals, and we already said time can be a decimal. We can have decimals of a second. So I already know my answer just based off of that. But for the range, if you really wanted to be, it would only be reasonable to start at 0, not negatives for your height. And if you go up, you can see its maximum height is 36. And it reaches it at 1.5 seconds. So y is the height. Okay, good. Questions on that? Okay. Other questions? Anytime let's start the response at all? We're gonna have it ready when I call them, so for that, it's done, we can figure it out. But any questions? Lots of them. Oh, we've seen it before. Four on this one. So, number 4, which of the functions, if any, eventually exceeds f of x as x approaches infinity? So look at all the different kinds of functions we have here. What's f of x an example of? Exponential, good, because the x is the exponent, and it looks exponential. H of x is an example of what? Linear, because it's in the form y equals mx plus b. And what's a g of x an example of? Linear. I meant for there to be a quadratic function example, but we know that quadratic functions have what in their equations? Wait, what did you say, Dean? Yeah, but if I'm looking at the equation, because the graphs can sometimes be hard to tell. What would I need in my equation for it to be a quadratic? It needs at a minimum an x squared. It can have other things like an x term or a constant, but it needs at least an x squared and nothing higher than that. Like not x cubed or something like that. Okay, but so just keep that in mind, because that'll be important on your test and on your retake. If you do have to retake it, hopefully you don't need to have to, hopefully you do really well the first time. But you need to be able to identify the difference between exponential, linear, and quadratic. And it's known that which of these always exceeds the others. Exponential will eventually exceed the others. Both linear and quadratic. That's just a rule. And it says as it approaches infinity. So we know by definition, exponential functions will always exceed quadratic and linear. So our exponential is the f of x. So which one will exceed f of x? Will any of them exceed f of x? None. So the answer is neither. Because g of x and h of x are both linear. The one they're asking you to compare it to is exponential. None of them will eventually exceed f of x. That's just like something you need to know. Reading that quick. Exponential functions always exceed the others. So good, questions on that? All right, questions on any others? So, number 10. All right, so number 10 is a good question to ask because we've mentioned line of symmetry before, but we really didn't even have time to practice it when it did come up. But it is on your tests. And I'll relate it to other things that we did practice so that you can still get the answer, even though I just mentioned we didn't do much of line of symmetry, except write down what the equation is. So to solve this, you would need the line of symmetry equation, which is x equals negative b over 2a. So if you take me up on my suggestion that you should make note cards, the line of symmetry equation would be a good note card to have. And the b and the a come from ax squared plus bx plus c. There's no c in this equation, but you know, B and A are gonna be from the standard form. And even if they write it out of orders, no matter what, the B is always gonna be what's in front of the X term. So what's gonna be my B value? Just the 8. So I'm gonna plug in 8 for B. And then that's gonna be over 2 times A. No matter what order it's in, A is always in front of the X squared. So what's my A? All right. And then we'll simplify this. This becomes a negative 8. What's 2 times 2? What's negative 8 divided by 4? And this, for it to be an equation, it has to say x equals negative 2. Do not put any extra spaces in your answer or it'll mark it wrong. It's not a coordinate. It's an equation for the line of symmetry. And what does it mean for something to be symmetric? It has to be same on both sides. It has to be a mirror image on both sides of this line of symmetry. And since we know our quadratics look like either this or like this, we know the line of symmetry should go right down the middle. So you can check your answer by graphing your equation, 10 plus 8x plus 2x squared. Okay, so I graph my given equation, and I'm also gonna graph my line of symmetry equation. The x equals negative 2 that I told you the answer would be once we calculated it. And look, it's giving me a line right down the middle, so that's how I know I did it right. What's also right in the middle of your graph is your vertex. Your line of symmetry should be x equals whatever the x of your vertex is. So if you remember that, then maybe you don't have to remember the formula. But that's how you do it. If you don't have the x equals, it's technically. Questions on that? Okay, questions on other things? Yosina? 11. All right, so number 11 on the topic side. So we have, which of the following statements is true concerning this standard form equation? That's right here. And it says the zeros are this and this, since this. Sorry, I try not to read like long equations to you, but we have a bunch of different zeros and different equations. So you have a few options. You could multiply out your equations until you find the standard form that matches. That might be a little tedious. You could remember that zeros mean what? So zeros are x-intercepts, so you can remember that. Graph your given equation, and then narrow it down into answers. So x squared minus 8x minus 20. sure I wrote it down right. Okay. And then since I know zeros means y or x intercepts, I'm gonna click on my x intercepts. So I have an x intercept of -2 and I'm going the wrong direction. Okay. I have an x intercept of -2 and +10. So know that my zeros are -2, +10. That should narrow me down between two answers. Okay, both of these say that the zeros are 10 and -2. But only one of them is right. And to figure out which one's right, you could try foiling these and see which one gives you the original. Or you could remember that in order to solve for the zeros, you set each factor equal to 0 and then solve for the x. That will be asked about on your test too. So what would x have to be to make this 0? 10. 10 minus 10 gives me 0. So that's so far working out. What would this x have to be in order to make it 0? Let me see if this one's the same. All right, if I set each of these equal to 0 and tried solving, what would x have to be to make it 0 here? And that we already said is not a 0, remember? So this one here is the right answer. Based off of that, they're always like opposite the signs that are in your factor form. This one over here is giving me the right zeros, but the wrong equation. It should always be like opposite. Okay, questions on that? Okay. I'm out of time for one or two more, depending on how long they are. So any other questions? Number 5 on this one, I think we did. Yeah. So let me, because I think he was searching for his binder. So let me just give you a hint on that one. This is recorded, so you can always go back to the video if you still can't figure it out. But the two things being compared are years and net worth. So think logically, what would have to go on the x-axis, years or net worth? And then that means your y-axis is your net worth. You can graph this in Desmos and see how it looks. And then try using the features on that graph to solve these. Like, when is the net worth 0? It's 0 at the x-axis. See where it touches there. What's my maximum? Well, that would be the tallest part of my graph. Interpret it that way. All right, any other questions? Let me know. I wouldn't pack up yet. You still have a few minutes. You can knock out a few more questions. You even have that optional study guide. I don't know if you guys saw that. The one that's extra credit and it's different practically every time you take it. You can get up to 100 extra credit points on it. And it'll really help you for your test on Tuesday. Because I know you could hit up your friends and probably get the answers. But like, if you need to actually know how to do it for the test, and that's why that other study guide is nice because it's different pretty much every time. All right, let me know if you have any other questions before you go. On Monday, I'll give you an opportunity to ask more questions before we do the review. But Mondays are really short, so try to email me your questions, whatever you need to do. Make sure Tuesdays are really good tests. Devon, did you have,